Good afternoon. Welcome to Frameworks and Tools for Progressive Web Apps. My name is Rowan Merewood. I'm a developer advocate for Chrome and web. I've come over from London today, so the weather is making me feel very welcome. Thank you for that. I'm also here for the rest of the event, so this is quite a short slot, but I would love to carry on this conversation with you. If you can't find me in person, you can also find me on Twitter, Rowan_M there, so please feel free to ask me questions. Now, what I would like to do today is explain the state of PWA tooling to you, explain some of the goals and the philosophy behind that tooling so you have a sort of concept of why you're using it, talk a bit about how you can apply this in single-page applications, and finally give you some best practices as well. Now, just so I have a bit of an idea of who's been paying attention and who's still awake, who has already heard the term PWA? Good. That should be nearly all of you, even the Android developers, because it was in the keynote this morning. What I would like to do is give you some context before we go into this. One of the questions that we always get is, well, what is the right way to build my app? How do I build the perfect PWA? Please don't ask me this question, because of course the answer is, it depends, right? We're all coming from different situations. Some of us have apps already. Some of us are building brand new apps. And also the approach differs for differing verticals as well. So the approach you take on an e-commerce site is very different to the approach that you take on a media site. That said, there are some common themes that run through this that we have identified. And we've tried to distill it down into 4 main pillars that I really want you to think about when you're busy building these experiences. First of all, it needs to be fast. You've probably heard the message because we've repeated this multiple times, but every microsecond of time that you make the user wait, that's a user who's abandoning your site, that's a conversion that you're not getting. So you really need to focus on making sure that the experience is as quick as possible. Now, secondly, because we're talking about progressive web apps, we're really talking about these high-powered websites, the websites that have taken the right vitamins. But that means that we've raised our users' expectations, so they're going to need to be more integrated with the device. That means there's an expectation that I'll have access to the full control of the camera. I might have access to Bluetooth. I expect location to work. I expect my device's orientation sensors to work. And again, as these experiences become more app-like, that also means that users are going to have more app-like expectations. And that means reliability. These sites need to work regardless of the network connection. I always should get some kind of experience that is useful to me as a user. And finally, like Sam mentioned this morning, no matter how many of the magical bells and whistles you implement, none of that makes a difference if you don't have the engaging content and functionality underneath that. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of the tools that we can use and how they go about helping you. And the reason I want to do this is because what we want to do is put the user first. We want to create the best user experience on the web, and we feel that to create the best user experience, we should also give you the best developer experience so that it's easy to create these experiences. OK. I'm going to show you some tools in a bit, but I want to tell you about what those tools are going to be able to help you with first. Top of the list, like I said, putting the user first. Save the user's time, because time is the biggest investment that the user is making into your app. So you can use tools to start identifying those areas of poor performance and apply common patterns to make those time savings and speed up the performance of your app. Critical to this and closely tied is also bandwidth, because bandwidth is spending the time of the user downloading the app, but it's also directly spending their money as well. So make sure that when you're analyzing your bandwidth use, you're taking a respectful approach to the user's budget. And then, one of the things that has always been heartening about the web is this idea that it's completely open and accessible everywhere. Right? I make a web page, and when I publish that, any client, any browser can access that web page. But in reality, we know that's not quite the case. You need to make tweaks for the different browsers. Different things are supported in different locations. But that shouldn't be directly your problem. Again, that's something that you want to make use of tooling and libraries to handle the differences between those browsers so that you can focus on writing the code that solves your business problems rather than starts to try and deal with platform inconsistencies. And when I talked about integration before, we enable things like push notifications on the web, across browsers, across systems, but there's a lot of multiple moving parts that you need to deal with to make those push notifications happen. But again, it's all standard, so tools and libraries can help you here. I want to touch on code generation and how that differs from just using a library. And finally, I'll show you some of the tools that you can use to make sure that when you've gone through all of these previous processes, you're still enforcing the best practices, that you start with a good experience and you keep a good experience as well. Let's look at some of the technology behind the PWAs that these tools are going to help you build. So first of all, a PWA is normally identified by its manifest. So this is a simple file that you can think of as the public description of what your PWA is capable of doing. Then there's the service worker. The service worker is a piece of JavaScript that is able to run in the background and take care of things for you when your site is not present in the browser. And finally, we're going to use some of these tools to actually build great applications as well, which is hopefully what you're all interested in. OK, starting with the manifest then. Since it's a standardized JSON file, there are a few tools that you can jump into that are A, going to help you generate that JSON file and go through the various items, and they will automate some of the tedious tasks in there, like providing the multiple sizes of icons and marking them up correctly. But it's also going to help you make decisions about what kind of things you may want to include in your manifest. So you've probably seen that you can specify that your web app is a standalone web app. You may want to investigate the different display modes, what that means for browser support, what that means for the user experience. Again, going through these tools will help you understand the full range of options that are out there and why you might want to choose particular ones. The service worker then falls kind of into the other category. It is an incredibly powerful tool, but with this power also comes a lot of complexity. So as you can see here, this is just the life cycle of the service worker when it is being added to your page. So it can sit there as a proxy, handling all inbound and outbound requests from your page. It's going to be what handles the incoming push requests. It can also coordinate across all the open clients you currently have on a device to manage the communication between them. This kind of low-level power is incredibly useful, but there's a lot that you need to learn to really take advantage of that. So again, we can wrap all of that functionality up in a library and some code generation to make sure that this is nice and simple for you. I wanted to show a bit about what you can do with Service Worker. So file caching. You'll see that there are a number of different approaches you can take to doing that. You can either do your file caching on or during the installation of the Service Worker. So this is when you might choose to proactively fetch a number of resources that you need to make your site available in an offline mode. But you might also want to do this at runtime, because obviously it would not be a good idea to spider your entire site and download it to the user's device. So you may just want to fetch whilst users are browsing your site, cache the content that they're looking at, and store that in the service worker. And finally, there are far more advanced caching strategies that might be relevant to your particular business use case. For example, maybe you have a special offer on the site that you want to ensure is available for the user, but it has a hard expiration time, so you don't want to show it past a particular point. Push notifications then, like I mentioned, there are a lot of standard parts here. You want to do different behavior. When the push notification is received, does the user currently have your app open, or is it closed? If it's open, you probably want to do something different by showing an in-app notification versus showing a notification on screen that the user will tap and navigate through to your app. And finally, on code generation then, really what I would like you to understand here is that code generation is a way of giving you code that is hopefully fast by default, is hopefully great by default, and comes with a selection of industry best practices built in, so it should have integration for metrics built in there, integration for analytics, security, usability, and so on. But the distinction between a code generation tool and a library is that when the code generation is complete, that code is yours. You need to make sure that you understand the code that has been produced and that you take it through the same review and testing processes as you would for code that any of your developers have written. So code generation can be a lot of fun, but don't assume that it's some kind of magic wand that you can just spread over your application and everything will work. OK, I want to split the tools for building a PWA into a couple different categories. Generic tools, which we can apply almost anywhere, some framework-specific tools that I'll show you, and then all the way at the end of this line is once you understand these tools, you start customizing them to be tightly coupled to your own build and application process. If we're talking about generic tools then, the best place to start is with the browser, because you are as close to your user as possible. Now, Chrome has its own developer tools built into the browser, and we could spend an entire session exploring this, but I want to highlight two areas that are particularly important if you're working with progressive web apps. The first is the application tab, and specifically the service worker entry inside of that. If you go into this when you are looking at any web page, you can see the currently active service workers that are attached to that page. You can see what stage that they're in. You can examine what they're storing. You can look at the console log specifically for that service worker as well. As part of your development process, you are going to want to be very familiar with this, because as you start to introduce all of this caching functionality, that means you're also going to need to make sure that you always know when you are getting the latest version of the code. You can also see in here that there's a method to bypass for network. So when you're developing, you can always just make sure that the caching for your service worker is completely ignored and you're always fetching from disk. Now, secondly, who's already visited the Lighthouse booth? Yep. Everyone else, after this, you should go see the Lighthouse booth, put your site in, see what kind of score that you get out. Now, Lighthouse is a standalone tool, but it exists inside of Chrome DevTools as one of the audits that you can run against your site. So again, if you go to the Audit tab inside of DevTools and perform an audit, then you will get back a score that covers the various progressive web app functionality for your site. It makes a number of performance-related measurements, accessibility measurements, and also a number of general best practices for websites as well. Hopefully already, you've heard from some of my colleagues about Workbox. So Workbox falls into the generic tool section, because what Workbox focuses on is how it can build out a service worker for you with a number of specific patterns. That means it's actually relatively simple to take Workbox and apply it into an existing site or apply it to a new site as well. It gives you three main things, but the team is always working on bringing additional best practices into this. First of all, various offline caching patterns. So when I talked about the various approaches you might want to take, Workbox provides these by default. You can do cache first. You can do network first. You can race the two so that you can respond with whichever is quicker. You can set expiration policies and so on. It also makes available offline analytics to you. This means that when your app is offline, you can still collect the analytics events, and when you're back and connected again, then it will batch those together and send those on. So this is incredibly important, because if you make your app available offline, you still want to know how your users are interacting with it so you can improve it in the future. And finally, we make use of newer technologies like background sync as well. So this means that you have a number of built-in strategies for how you want to refresh content that you're storing on the user's device. Workbox is open source, so you can come find this on GitHub. If things aren't working out for you, then please raise issues, talk to the team, or if you have something that you think Workbox should be able to do, you could even contribute some code yourself. Now, we're not the only people doing this. If you make use of Webpack for bundling or other parts of your build pipeline, then I would highly recommend looking at the offline plugin for Webpack. This does a number of similar things where it enables you to build out a service worker based on your Webpack configuration, where you can specify various assets for caching ahead of time, or caching when the user browses to them, or just optimistically making them optional so that you can cache them when they're most useful. Again, this is on GitHub, and there's plenty of sample code and documentation linked off of that repository to help you get started. And the other thing, like I said, I really love the open nature of the web and how easy that makes it for everyone to get involved. So I also like it when companies then start contributing this stuff back as well. Pinterest has been doing a huge amount in terms of building a very highly performing web app, and they have actually started pushing back some of their libraries on creating, testing, and experimenting with service workers. One of the things that's particularly interesting about their offering is they include a number of test sort of harnesses and isolation methods for the service worker as well. So we sometimes have a tendency with new technology to get a little carried away with all of the cool stuff we can build and not necessarily cover testing it. So to me, this is really a sign that the technology is becoming much more mature and production ready as well. And then, because of how fast-paced this is, I feel it's also important to understand some of the history as well. So some of the earlier libraries that are still active, there's SW Precache and SW Toolbox. Now, these have been sort of superseded by Workbox because they were earlier, they're a bit more tightly coupled to specific functionality. But what you'll find is that a number of the CLI tools that I show you for the frameworks are actually making use of these libraries in the background. So they're worth looking at, but I would look at Workbox first if you are starting off something new of your own. OK, it's also always good to have a sort of industry convention or benchmark that you can use as well. So most of the time, like if you have a device with a screen, whether it's like a graphing calculator, or a printer, or an oscilloscope, the default sort of benchmark is to see if you can run Doom or Quake on it. So for front-end developers, it's, can I take your JavaScript framework and write a Hacker News client with it? So HND PWA is a collection of Hacker News readers built in a variety of frameworks using a variety of libraries. And what I find really useful is that this is a way to compare approaches in the different frameworks. So if you're trying to decide which one you want to choose to solve a particular problem, or you want to see how the industry is making use of different technologies, then this is kind of a great playground to go and compare solutions to the same problem across a multitude of tools. OK, hopefully by now you should have a feeling for the kind of mindset that I'm hoping that you can get into. What I would really like to accomplish with this, and what you should be thinking of these tools as doing for you, is one, simplifying your mental model. The amount you need to learn to sort of properly understand and become an expert in service worker is huge. And that investment is probably not part of the time that you want to be using when you're doing your job. And also, a lot of these problems have already been solved. So there's no need for you to reinvent the wheel and spend a lot of time writing a lot of extra code to handle all of these edge cases. So all in all, this is about saving time for you and basically getting the best solution for your user. And really, what it means is that you can focus your effort on the use cases that are important, the problems that are closer to your business, not the problems that are closer to the platform. And as well, like I keep saying, the accessibility and the open nature of the web means that it was really easy for me to get involved when I was younger, creating terrible websites with Perl backends. But it was still very simple. It was accessible. So what this means is that by using these libraries, you can still layer in Service Worker with that same level of simplicity and just get going and get something published on the web. And when I talk about edge cases as well, like the kind of things that these libraries will handle for you that you don't want to have to try and write again yourself, Service Worker installation. If your app loses connectivity during the install, then what are you going to do? A naive approach here would be to say, well, I had a list of things I was going to cache, so I just won't cache them. Or maybe you actually say, I didn't complete caching my list of things, so I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to try downloading it all over again. Neither of these are good solutions for the user. One of them gets them nothing. The other one makes them spend their bandwidth again to get the same result they could have had. If you use a library here, there are a number of approaches that can actually go through validate the existing items that you have cached, and then pick up and resume the download when you left off. And again, what if your user has full connectivity? And by this seems a little counterintuitive, but what I mean here is if I'm reading a piece of content and I'm getting the cached version from your service worker and then it updates in the background, what should you do? Should you force me to refresh my page? Should you show me a little notification saying I can tap here to refresh? Or can you actually get the content and dynamically insert it into the existing page? All of these patterns already start to exist in these libraries, so rather than trying to work out how you're going to do it, you can just work out which one you want to use. And finally, one of the benefits of Service Worker and having an additional caching layer here as well is that if you're dealing with an API that you don't control, you now have the ability to add additional layers of caching on top of that. This means that if you have an API that isn't going to work well offline, you can actually cache the responses from the API so that when your app is offline, you can still act as if you're getting the last piece of data that was available from the API. OK, now I'm reiterating this again. You're here to save time. You're here to save yourself a lot of code. It's not just developer time, it's operational time, it's bug fixing, it's QA, and save a lot of effort. The reason I reiterate this is because of the number of times that developers always seem to want to go off and reinvent the entire universe because it gives them an opportunity to write a new JavaScript framework. Please don't do that. Now I want to jump in to single-page applications. I also want to stress here that there are lots of different ways of approaching PWAs. As you've probably seen, my colleagues have shown you a couple. Tomorrow there's a talk on migrating your existing site to a PWA as well. But if you are starting with one of the single-page application frameworks, then this is a selection for you to do so. Now, this is by no means a comprehensive list. Like I was warning, in the time that I've been presenting, someone has probably written and released a new JavaScript framework anyway. Maybe someone in this room has done this, actually. But what I will do is I will show you examples from these 5, because what I would like to stress is how easy it is for you to just dip in and get started so that you can see how these frameworks operate, and you can start to make a more informed decision about what you would like to choose for your project. Let's start with React then. So React has create React app, and this is a command line script that is going to create a service worker for you. It's going to generate your web app manifest, and it's actually going to give you a cache-first strategy for serving your assets as well. And it's as simple as this. I'm using Yarn in these examples, but there's no reason you can't use NPM or your own package management or manually downloading these as well. So here, I'm installing the create React app into the global scope, so it's available for me on the command line. I'm then calling create React app with just the name of the app. I jump into the directory, and I run yarn build. At the end of this, it's going to output some information for you saying how you can run a development server, how you can run a production server. Run that production server and jump in, and you'll reach the Welcome to React page, where they're actually just going to show you where in the code directory you can go to continue your adventure. If you open DevTools as well, this is an ideal time to go and look at the service worker that has been installed for you, so you can take a look in there and you can see the methodology that they're using to create that cache-first approach to serving the content. Next up is Preact. So this is the Preact CLI. This is a slightly more fuller featured by default. They give the app creation to you. And what they put out in their default template is actually an app shell. So you get your static index HTML with some content pre-rendered, and then it's going to go and fetch the first root. Preact also provides browser list auto-prefixing. What this means is that by default, you are going to get customized versions for the different browsers that are coming in. And quite interestingly, this is one where you may want to look at this regardless of if you are using Preact. They have a configuration that will interface with Firebase static hosting, because Firebase static hosting is HTTP2 and can handle server push. So their configuration by default will actually take advantage of HTTP push to push some of those resources down, speeding up that delivery to the user even more. Like I mentioned before, they use SW precache in the background, so if you want to understand what they're doing, it may be useful for you to look at that library too. And again, we're just adding the preact CLI. In this case, we're saying create default. So default here is the name of the template. There are a number of different templates that you can explore if you want to create different apps. I do that, I jump in, I run yarn build, I get my feedback back for how to run the development server, and I jump in. And by default, they actually give you a bit of a material design style app where you're actually seeing the routing component in action as well. So the navigation that you have at the top there will enable you to navigate between different tabs. We've then got the Polymer CLI for the Polymer framework. This gives you, again, manifest generation and an optional service worker you can drop in. Some approaches that Polymer takes that are quite interesting, they actually, by default, give you 3 different bundles. They give you an ES5 bundle, an ES6 bundle, and then they also give you an unbundled ES6 version. Now, as browsers are progressing, people are starting to experiment with do we still need to bundle our JavaScript, or can we leave it unbundled? At the moment, you probably still want to bundle, but this is a good way of immediately getting that unbundled one so that you can benchmark between the two of them to see what the performance difference is for you. Polymer CLI also gives you an implementation of the purple pattern out of the box. So there is a server that comes with the Polymer CLI that you can use to serve your content using HTTP2 push and actually proactively pushing a number of resources to the user. Again, we're pulling in Polymer CLI and Bower. We're making our directory. We're jumping in. We're running Polymer init. Now, this will take you through an interactive process where you can select a number of starter projects. I've chosen the starter kit here. Then I'm running build. And we get another nice material design-related app with navigation and routing built in. Again, go and take a look at the service worker that's being run there. That will show you not just the caching, but also how it handles some of those incoming resources as well. Vue.js, so in this case, we're going to go get the CLI tool, and we're also going to pull down a number of default templates. This gives us the app creation, the manifest, the service worker, the app shell. One of the things that Vue does is it actually does some nice lazy loading for the additional JavaScript, CSS, your fonts, and so on. So I would recommend looking at what they do there to understand how you can pull in that functionality as you need it, rather than necessarily bundling it all up front and pushing it down to the user. That looks like this. We're adding in our Vue CLI. We're initializing the project. This is another interactive one, so it will guide you through the process, and it actually gives you some helpful hints on how to name your application so it's not truncated and so on. We go in, we build the Yarn application, and then we jump straight into our Vue application again. And as per usual, go take a look at the developer tools, and there's your service worker. And then, finally, we can take a look at Angular. So Angular CLI tool will also give us the app creation, service worker. What they do with the service worker is a little different. So rather than giving you the service worker directly, they actually have a JSON-based configuration file that is designed to handle the standard caching. There's a plugin you can pull in for handling push notifications and other lifecycle events. So they've kind of tried to provide this abstraction on top of the lifecycle so that you can just focus on the processes that you're trying to implement rather than needing to necessarily understand the service worker itself. Inside of here, I'm adding Angular again. I'm running the ng tool to create this. And inside of Angular, what you actually need to do is set a few configuration options here to say that I want a service worker by default, and then I make the production build of my Angular app. And we jump in, and we've got a basic Hello World app with some links off to other applications that can help get us started. OK, that is my whirlwind tour through some front-end frameworks. You're all experts now, so go off and build the next generation of PWAs. But I wanted to highlight a few other projects that you can look at. PWA Rocks and PWA Builder are actually very good tools for taking you through some of the functionality choices that you want to make. So PWA Builder gives you this kind of radio selection, that you can go through, answer questions about the kind of functionality you want, and it will start to spit out some basic templates and starter kits for you. Best practices, then, to finish us off. Always remember to go and check the application tab, because I guarantee you will run into a couple issues the first time you're using Service Worker. Rob Dodson has actually written an excellent guide that you can get to here, bit.ly debugging-service worker. This will give you a number of tips on doing things like adding a kill switch to your service worker so you have a sort of escape hatch to wipe it, making sure that you know the correct way to reset this inside of DevTools so that you're not consistently clearing your entire cache and cookies, maybe uninstalling and reinstalling Chrome in the hope that you can actually get a fresh version of your application. And really, the piece of advice that I would like you to leave with here is try and follow the tools. So if you find yourself fighting with the way of the tool is trying to do something, then that's probably a sign that either you need to change the way you're thinking or you need to look at a different tool. So the tool should be getting you 80% of the way there, and it's that remaining 20% that you want to be focusing your effort on, not fighting with the way that the tool is doing the generation. And a couple other caveats. Amazing as DevTools is, please don't assume that it is a be-all and end-all. There are a couple things that will not work exactly as you expect inside of DevTools. For example, the offline checkbox that you use there doesn't affect every single type of network connection. So if you have WebSockets, say via the Firebase real-time database, that data may still be going back and forth even when you're in offline mode. So when it gets through to the end, always make sure that you test on a real device, preferably the same device that the majority of your users have. I also want to just call back to the Pinterest stuff, because they also add in the end-to-end tests for Service Worker as well, which can be incredibly helpful for isolating that logic and testing it through. And then really, the last thing is to stay up to date and stay involved, because Service Worker is gaining a huge amount of adoption. So Safari is going to be implementing it and so on. But it is in development, and the spec is always being updated. So that means you want to watch for those future developments. And if you have a direction that you would really like the project to go, then this is the time to make your voice heard. So please, go out and give those tools a try. Give feedback on how you found them. And I would like to say thank you very much for your time. Any other questions, come find me or poke me on Twitter. And please enjoy the rest of the event.